Love again. For almost the whole of human history, people have tended to assume that certain societies, tribes, ethnic groups, or races are different from one another in various inherent ways. Sometimes these relate to intelligence, and at other times to culture, sophistication, or a propensity to behave in primitive and violent ways. Before the Second World War, such beliefs were almost universally accepted in Europe and the United States. Today, on the other hand, it would take a reckless or stupid person publicly to support such ideas. Into which of those two categories I myself fall, I shall leave viewers to decide for themselves. Now, the belief in differences between ethnicities or races, call them what you will, is one thing. Operating unpleasant systems based upon such beliefs which act to the disadvantage of excluded groups is a separate matter entirely. In other words, one might believe that some groups tend towards lower IQs, for example, and still disapprove strongly of segregation in the United States Deep South or apartheid in South Africa. In other words, we can welcome the fact that people in Britain have equal opportunities to get into Oxford University or become brain surgeons, while at the same time not being overly surprised that few West Indians will be able to make the grade. Racism and the exercise of racial prejudice are, in other words, two different things. It was the aftermath of the Second World War which caused the rejection of the idea of racism and brought about the assumption that believing in racial differences must inevitably end in unfairness, murder, and mayhem, which is not at all true. The change in perception of such things may be dated precisely, although it took time to spread across the whole of the civilized world. As Allied troops swept through Europe, they came across horrors such as most people could not have imagined. In camps like Belsen, liberated on the 15th of April 1945, scenes which might have come from Dante's Inferno were revealed. Just as modern technology had made possible the mass killing of human beings and their destruction on an industrial scale, so too did it make the conditions in Belsen visible to everybody in Europe and America. Newsreel films of the condition of prisoners held in the camp were soon being shown in cinemas across the world. Today, the camp which most people see as embodying the Holocaust is, of course, Auschwitz. But for the first few years after the end of the war, it was Belsen which was most widely seen as symbolic of the dreadful crimes of the Nazis. This is perhaps because the liberation of Belsen and the conditions which were found in the camp after the British occupied that part of Germany were recorded in detail by the British Army Film and Photographic Unit. The films which were taken of the 10,000 unburied corpses found when troops first entered the camp were made into a short documentary with a commentary by the BBC broadcaster Richard Dimbleby. This was shown in cinemas across Britain, and it seared itself into the national consciousness. Cinema going was at that time all but universal, which meant that the ghastly images were seen by the great majority of the British population. They found their way to the rest of Europe too, and also crossed the Atlantic. The corpses and malnourished survivors of Belsen came to stand for all that the Allies had been fighting against for the last 6 years. In short, a version of the slippery slope argument was unthinkingly adopted as dogma by many people in the West. It was a visceral feeling rather than a logical deduction, and seldom clearly articulated. Had it been so, then it might have been seen in this form. The Nazis were racially prejudiced against Jews. This prejudice led to mass murder. This means that if we believe that any ethnic group is inherently different from us, it might also lead to mass murder. Such a belief is therefore dangerous and must be suppressed. There, in a nutshell, you have the sequence of events which caused the abstract acceptance of ethnic and racial differences to be viewed with such disfavour in the modern world. I need hardly say that it's a completely illogical point of view, but it is one which has been widely adopted, and people who speak out against it or try and even point out some contradictions in holding that point of view are likely to be viewed as being, well, next door to being Nazis, I suppose.